Duke University is pleased to invite Professor Valerie Hansen to join us at Global Asia Conversation with Scholars. I am Yuan Chen, Environmental Humanities Fellow of the Global Asia Initiative and Franklin Humanities Institute. Professor Hansen is the Stanley Woodward Professor of History at Yale University. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Professor Hansen is the author of Silk Road, A New History, The Open Empire, A History of China to 1800, Negotiating Daily Life in Traditional China, and Changing Gods in Medieval China. She is also the co-author of the popular world history textbook, Voyages in World History. Professor Hansen's most recent book, The Year 1000, When Explorers Connected the World and Globalization Began, has been translated into multiple languages, including German and Chinese. Okay, Professor Hansen, your most recent book, The Year 1000, tells the intriguing story of how explorers and merchants created regional networks and also joined them to form a global network. It really shakes the ground of our current understanding of globalization, which is the vast majority of people still believe globalization is a post-1492 product after the discovery of the New World. But your research, your discovery in sources across the world challenges this view. So I would like to ask you some specific questions about some key players in the Year 1000, the global network.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it's my pleasure to be here, Dr. Chen.
Thank you, Professor Hansen. So first I want to ask, you have constantly mentioned the name Kitan and their country, the Liao Empire, in your book. But I bet many people are not familiar with the Kitan people and the Liao, but you have demonstrated their crucial role in network building and also in the expansion in Central Asia and East Asia, and probably even beyond. Do you mind give us a brief introduction of the Kitan people, who they were, what they did, and what were their contacts with other peoples and what their legacies in world history?
Sure, I would be glad to. The Kitan were a nomadic herding people. You can think of them as the ancestors of the Mongols. There were a lot of customs that they had in common with the Mongols who come later. And they were based in the central North China today. So what's the modern provinces in China of Inner Mongolia and Liaoning. And they were very important in terms of contacts with other peoples because they saw themselves as the successor to the Tang Dynasty. When we teach Chinese history now, we tend to look at only the most established, the biggest dynasties. And so the standard succession is the Tang rule until, let's see, 910, then there's 50-year interregnum, and then the Sung dynasty is founded in 960. But the Kitan actually took over right from the Tang, and they backdated their start date so that when the Tang ended in 910, they began. So they saw themselves as the successors to the Tang, and they had their foreign relations, they had contacts with the Koreans, very importantly. Of course, once it was established, the Sung dynasty, the Karakhanids, who are a Muslim dynasty, the Liao were allied with the Karakhanids, a Muslim dynasty that was based to the west of the Kitan, so in the area around modern Xinjiang. And then very interestingly, we have a record that survives only in Arabic of an envoy who visited Afghanistan, the court of Mahmud of Ghazni, and asked to initiate regular relations with the Ghaznavids. And the Mahmud said no, he did not want to initiate the regular diplomatic relations. And he gave two reasons. One was that the Kitan were so far away. And he said, there's just no likelihood that you'll be able to help us or we'll be able to help you. You're so far away. And then he said, but if you convert to Islam, try me again. right back, try me again. And so that showed he was more open to an alliance with Muslims, at least at that juncture, than to non-Muslims. Although historians have pointed out Mahmud had plenty of alliances with other non-Muslim rulers, especially in India.
I see. That's very interesting. So you mentioned that the Kitans were not Muslims. So what was their religion, or what were their religions?
Well, we know a little bit from the Chinese dynastic history of the Liao about they have their own indigenous beliefs, that when the dead died, they left their corpses in trees where animals presumably ate them or cleaned the bones. And then they became very sincere supporters of Buddhism, and especially the royal house was a major patron of Buddhism. And it's interesting that for the Kitan, the language of Buddhism is mostly Chinese. They have a huge project for the carving of Buddhist texts into stones. And those texts were all in Chinese. There is the occasional Sanskrit letter in different things in these, and some of these stones survive. You can see them. There's a huge collection of these stones in the southwestern part of Beijing called Fangshan, and you can go there and see some of these stones are visible, but almost everything is in Chinese. So they were very ardent Buddhists.
I see. So in East Asia at the time, we know Buddhism was very prominent in Japan, in Korea, in the Korean Peninsula, and as well as the Song Dynasty in China, and also in Xisha as well. So what was the Liao's place in this Buddhist network in Asia at the time?
I mean, it was part of the Buddhist network. One of the things that's interesting is that there was a shared belief in the Liao territory and Japan and Korea in the coming of the end of the Buddhist ages, so in Chinese Mofa and in Japanese Mappo. And I don't know about the Xixia, if they shared this belief, but everybody in the Liao felt that the world was going to come to an end in 1043. This was true in Japan too. So one of the most famous buildings you can see in Nara, the Byodo Inn, was built at this time for the same reason, that the world was coming to an end and people had to take measures to preserve Buddhist teachings to survive this upcoming dark age. And one of the things that the Kitan did was build pagodas and preserve various like Buddhist treasures in the hope that they would survive the end of the world. I mean, surprise, the world did not end in 1043, but and people seem to have gotten over that very quickly. They seem to have adjusted very well. But that belief was different from what people in Song Dynasty China thought. They also believed in the Mappo, the end of the world, or the Mofa, the end of the Dharmic age. But the Chinese had thought it would be around 550, so much earlier, about 500 years earlier than the Liao believed it.
I see. But somehow the Liao and the Japanese, they share the same belief, but the Song Dynasty China, they had a different belief.
Right. That's interesting about Buddhist networking and that, or where these networks were. One of the things that's holding these different countries together is the book market. And so we have records of people like in Japan, asking somebody in Korea to buy a book for them, right? That they know it will survive. And that Korean book market was very important for the Sung also, that people in South China also went to Korea to look for books that didn't exist in South China.
I see. Interesting. So what was the official and unofficial contact of, between the Liao and the Song at the time?
Well, it's funny when you say, I mean, the official story is that the Song comes to power in 960, and then it and the Liao are intermittently at battle for like 40, just pick a random number, 44 years. And at one point, so around in 1004, the Liao launched an invasion of the territory south of Beijing. The Liao are controlling Beijing, and they launched this invasion south into Hebei towards Kaifeng, towards the Song capital. And it's a blitzkrieg maneuver. They don't slow down and lay siege to towns. They just keep moving with the towns surrounded. And the Sung, I was going to say the Sung don't surrender, but they send word to some of the Sung emperor's advisors, know some of the Chinese advisors of the Liao emperor, and they send word saying, let's draw up a peace. And so the two sides draw up a peace called the Treaty of Chanyuan, and which is signed in 1005. And that's a very interesting document. When I was thinking about the year 1000 and things that happened in that year, one of the things I knew about was this Treaty of Chanyuan. It's very famous among Sung historians. And it arranged for the regular exchange of diplomatic parties. So on the two emperors' birthdays, the Liao emperor and the Sung emperor's birthday, envoys would travel back and forth. There were a bunch of different provisions. They established trading markets on the border. There were some things were banned, like the Sung forbade this export of books to the Liao. The Liao forbade the export of horses to the Sung, and these are pretty regularly violated, these bans. But and the fascinating thing about the Treaty of Chanyuan is that the peace holds for a century. So it's kind of inspiring in our current conflict age to hear about a peace that holds for 100 years, 100 plus years.
Exactly. That's very remarkable. So thank you for this introduction of the Kitan in the year 1000 global network. I want to move on to ask you about the Vikings. You have talked extensively about the archaeological sites of Viking settlements in North America. Can you tell us more about their presence in the New World? What was their motivation to sail to the Americas, and what New World resources attracted them, and why they left without leaving a permanent link like Columbus did in 1492?
Some of those questions I can answer, some of them I can't. The information we have about the Viking voyages, we have archaeological information, and we have information from the Icelandic sagas, which were written in Old Norse. And the sagas report, and there's a lot of debate about whether the sagas are actually about the Americas. The sagas talk about a place called Vinland, and I think with the discovery of this archaeological site in Newfoundland called Lanshaw Meadows in northern Newfoundland, and so in northeastern Canada, with the discovery of that site, I think many people think, okay, Vinland must have included at least this site at Lanshaw Meadows. So, but the sagas don't say that they went there for a specific reason. The sagas report that a ship sailed off course. A man named Bjarni Herjolfsson set sail from Iceland going to Greenland and missed, so a storm came up. He missed the tip of Greenland and he went to other places. And then he's able to make his way back. Leif Erikson he knew about Bjarni's voyages. He actually bought his ships, which is kind of interesting. Kind of the idea is like, oh, if the ships could go there once, maybe they can go there again. He buys the ships. This is according to the sagas, and sails. He is probably looking for a place he can establish himself as a warband leader. His father is a warband leader in Greenland, and the sons of warband leaders have the challenge of finding their own territory. So I think that's probably the most compelling explanation for why the Vikings go there, and that's pretty much the reason they go anywhere. So they go to the Americas. We have archaeological evidence that they stay for about 10 years. There's 10 layers of settlement at Lanshaw Meadows, and then they leave. The archaeological record doesn't tell us why. The sagas describe battles with the indigenous peoples who are called Skrælings, or the wretched ones. And it seems most likely that they decide that they're outnumbered. The Norse have some advantages. They have metal weapons, which the indigenous peoples don't, but they're vastly outnumbered. And also it's a very poor part of North America. I mean, even in the early 20th century, this part of Newfoundland was very poor. The main source of revenue was seal hunting, and people lived very frugally. So I think probably they left because there wasn't enough to support them.
I see. So the resources at the time were actually not abundant. So that's probably why they left.
Right. I mean, I was going to say, I think the big contrast is with the Viking voyages, the Norse voyages into Eastern Europe, where they do sit. I mean, they settle, they interbreed with the local women, and they create this new society called the Rus, and they stay there for, they never leave. They blend in with local society, so they stop being recognizably Swedish or recognizably Danish or Norwegian. These are all anachronisms at the time. Well, they're not all anachronisms. Those countries existed in 1000, but the identities were more blurred maybe than they are now. And then in Eastern Europe, they've had a huge impact. So it seems like it was easier to settle. It was easier, they could profit better in Eastern Europe than they could in the Americas.
So that's part of their adventures, their experiments, and they chose the most suitable settlements in the end.
Right.
Are there any traces of the products they brought back to Europe from Americas?
There are two, arrowheads, or archaeologists call them projectile points, that were found in Greenland, that the stone is certainly North American and not local to Greenland. And then also in Greenland, archaeologists found some fur of animals that was preserved in like a frozen site. And there was, I think, buffalo fur. So it's remarkable how little evidence there is of things coming from the Americas to Greenland. I don't know of anything being found in Europe. The evidence in the other direction is interesting too, just because there's so little of it. Well, there's the settlement at Lansall Meadows, and they had a piece of jewelry to fasten a cloak. And that was, when the archaeologists found that, they were very excited because it was so distinctly Norse. And later on, they found a Viking penny, a penny from the 1060s. So we know that there was contact, but that doesn't seem like it generated a huge amount of trade, or at least as much as we can tell from the archaeological record. I
see. Were there any Asian products in the Viking collection of things they collected from the world?
There's, if you look at, so now shifting away from Greenland to like Norway and Sweden, in Norway, there's two huge boats that have been excavated from like the late 800s, the early 900s. And there are some things there are some silks that seem to be distinctly Asian. How far? I don't think they necessarily come from China. They may be from Byzantium or the Iranian world. There's a metal bucket that has like a Buddha face on it. And there's a hoard it's funny, the hoard is much earlier. The hoard is around 500, where that contained a bunch of foreign items. And one of them was an Egyptian ladle, like a spoon, a big soup spoon. And that hoard also contained a figure of a Buddha from India. So that's, now does that mean somebody from India traveled all the way to that hoard? The hoard I think it's from the island of Gotland. So it's in Sweden. No, I don't think so. I think this was probably traded, like trickle traded. One person traded it to the next person, and they traded it to the next person, but it's made its way into this hoard. So the big evidence of contact with Asia for the Norse is the dirham, the silver coins with Arabic writing on them that were found all over Eastern Europe and Scandinavia in huge quantities, hundreds of thousands of coins, and presumably were payments for slaves from Scandinavia that were then sold to, or Eastern Europe, sold to Baghdad and the other big slave markets of the Abbasid Empire.
I see. So in this year 1000 global trade network, I wonder, was there a universally most sought after or most desired product in all regions? Nowadays people like iPhones, no matter where you are. Was there an iPhone equivalent in the year 1000? Why did people like it? Were there any marketing efforts to promote this iPhone of year 1000?
Well, I personally, I think the best candidate for the iPhone of the year 1000 is Chinese ceramics, that they were high fired, so they were harder, they were more resilient than ceramics made in Southeast Asia or South Asia or in the Middle East, and easier to clean because they were high fired. But in terms of like the worldwide good, the iPhone has greater reach than these Chinese ceramics did. The Chinese ceramics have been found all the way from the East African coast to, in South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, of course, in China, in Japan, in Korea. So, it's about maybe a third of the world. It's not all the way around the world. It's heavy, right? So it was usually transported by water, and that's a major sea route that connects China with the Middle East and then East Africa. I think other goods were moving on that route. We know the Chinese were exporting metals, both in the form of coins, but also in like ingots that the purchasers could then melt down and make their own coins with. And they were probably exporting their famous textiles, silk and maybe cotton in this area, hot areas like India and East Africa. But we have many fewer archaeological traces of those textiles.
I see. Interesting. I wonder if we can come back to the fundamental question that I probably should have asked in the very beginning, which is why 1000? You mentioned the Treaty of Yuan between the Liao and the Song, and you also mentioned the Viking arrival in the Americas. I wonder, was there any environmental force or environmental forces behind all these movement of people and the commodities around year 1000?
Recently, I've been working on an article with an environmental historian named Alex Moore, and he works on things like tree cores and climate history. And it's clear that the year 1000 is part of what climate historians used to call the global warming period. But since the world did not all get warm at the same time, some places got warm, like Europe and China got a little bit warmer, but the Middle East got colder. So it's called the medieval climate anomaly, the MCA. So we know climate change is taking place. One of the things that's going on in the year 1000 in the big agricultural centers is that there's a big increase in agricultural production. And so we know that's going on in China. We know it's going on in Europe. A historian named R.I. Moore has written about the cerealization of Europe, meaning that more of Europe is devoted to planting barley and wheat than it had been previously, and the European population increases dramatically. In China, we know that rice production goes way up during the Song dynasty. So
I see. But that was also due to some agricultural technological improvement, right?
Right. Yeah, I think this is a case where climate change may have encouraged the use of these like new seeds or new agricultural technologies because yields were higher. And because the yields were higher, people could leave the land where they were working. Some people were able to leave and explore or try to sell goods or become merchants. It frees up it offers some opportunities for people to pursue new careers.
I see. Interesting. I now want to ask you about the comparisons between the year 1000 globalization and the current globalization. The current globalization connects regions, but different regions also take different roles. There are providers of raw materials, and there are providers of labor, and also providers of high tech and innovation, and so forth. Was there a similar structure in the globalization of year 1000?
Well, my book is about when globalization began. So I'm not claiming that globalization reached a full-blown state. And I think most historians of globalization would say sometime in the 1970s or the 1980s is when we see like globalization 2.0 in full force. And if you read in globalization theory, people talk about space-time compression. So you get on a plane and, a day later, you're halfway around the world, right? Well, obviously that was not, I was going to say, nothing like that's happening in the year 1000. There's no technological innovations. People are moving in sailboats, or they're walking, or they're riding on horses. But there are some examples of regional specialization. So, for example, one of the things I think that's different about the year 1000, and maybe it would be instructive for us in our current globalized world to think about, is that no country completely takes over the production of a given good, wiping out all the local producers. And so we were talking about ceramics and Chinese ceramics and how valued they were. But there are archaeological finds of Chinese ceramics next to locally made copies of those Chinese ceramics. So that tells us that there were local potters making inferior copies. They're not fired to such a high temperature, to as high a temperature, but they have a market for them. And so I think that that's one of the changes that in the past, in the year 1000, we're talking about sea trade, and the ships often sank, right? Shipwrecks are one of our major sources about the trade. Today, with pre-COVID, with 747s or other giant airplanes, Airbuses, it's possible to ship, Apple can ship huge numbers of those iPhones all around the world. There's no check on their capacity to ship, right? The airplane travel is reliable, and if the market is there, they'll ship whatever good it is that they want to ship. So there is a big difference in scale and impact on society.
I see. People still bring different things to the table, even if it's still in the formative stage.
That's absolutely true. And I think in the book, I say that China is the most globalized place. And I was thinking particularly about Quanzhou and Guangzhou. And these are places where they are importing. So we talked about Chinese exports, but the Chinese are importing all kinds of things with smells. There's a Chinese word xiang, and
yes.
You can translate it as a fragrance, but it includes fragrant woods like sandalwood, or aloes wood is one of the ones that keeps coming up in the year 1000 and all kinds of sources everywhere. I mean, and people like aloes wood so much they make whole rooms out of it in China. They import the wood from modern Malaysia as one of the big sources. And so the Chinese are importing these raw materials from often Southeast Asia, but also South Asia. I mean, frankincense and myrrh are coming from Arabia. So many people in Chinese society want these items linked to fragrance. And I think it's easy for us to say, oh, it can't have been that important. Like, how important is incense to us, or how important is perfume to us? But don't think about us, think about them living then. And if you look at the sources, you have fabulously wealthy people like the guy who builds the 3 rooms out of imported aloes wood. But you also have ordinary workers going into a street market and buying a piece of sugarcane that's been steamed in Tibetan musk. So it's flavored with musk. And I think I told you this, I was talking about this and saying, my colleague Paul Friedman, who works on medieval spices, was there. And I said, I just don't understand. Why couldn't they just eat sugarcane? Why does it have to taste like musk? And he said, Valerie, you idiot. Think about Starbucks. You go in there and for an extra 50 cents, you can get your latte to be pumpkin flavored. And you have a better day because it has pumpkin flavored latte. That's the same idea, that these workers are going to the market and buying sugarcane that's been flavored with Tibetan musk.
I love the flavored sugarcane story. And it's also interesting that globalization was not just the elite thing as you just described. It's also for commoners in China at the time, that even a worker could afford something from abroad. He just consumed this as something every day.
There's a scene in the famous Song painting, the Qiming Shanghatu, and where there's a furniture store, and it labels the main woods that are being sold there. And would people look at that and know that one of the words is the word for frankincense? Would they? I think people might have known, oh, this is not local. I'm willing to think that the worker gets to the sugarcane stall and thinks, oh, Tibetan musk flavor. I'm saying Tibetan musk. It just says musk, but it's a weird character. It's weird in Chinese. It's possible that they knew it wasn't locally produced.
I see. Interesting. So Valerie, let me ask you the last question. Globalization is constantly being criticized these days for various reasons, and some of which we actually already talked about here and there. So from what you have demonstrated in your book, what lessons can we learn from the globalization since year 1000? And how can such lessons inform us of the future of globalization?
Well, one thing I would say is, I finished the book right before COVID, submitted the manuscript in like January of 2020. I don't think any of us knew in January of 2020 how quickly everything could shut down.
Right.
How quickly and how dramatically. So and I don't have any examples of that happening in the year 1000. One of the things that we talked about already was that in the year 1000, there's like limited impact of foreign goods coming into any particular market, that local goods should be produced. And so I think that's a lesson that's very important. It's like, rather than envisioning a world where every single thing you buy, including face masks, is made in the cheapest place that can make them in the world, you say, there's some things we need to be able to produce ourselves in case this happens again, we're cut off. So I think that's one of the messages. The other thing I think is that there's in Vinland sagas, there's a story about of the first encounters between the Norse and the indigenous peoples, and the Norse in one of the versions are trading red cloth, and the indigenous peoples are trading furs. And the Norse start off by giving big pieces. We don't know how big, but by the end, they realize they're running out of the red cloth, and they're giving just like a finger's slice, a length of a finger's worth of red cloth. And that, I think, just shows that this human desire for something new, it's the same thing as the workers going into the market and buying the musk-flavored sugarcane.
Right.
That's something that is part of the human condition. And so, when people talk about the downside of globalization, I think that they sometimes forget how much pleasure people derive from bringing some small item home that is from around the world, halfway around the world. And so, I think when we're thinking about taming globalization, that we also need to be aware of how much we all enjoy it, its benefits.
Sure. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Hansen, for this wonderful and very vivid introduction of the proto-globalization since year 1000. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.